You have 14 days to vacate the property, or the sheriff will remove you and your children by force. My sister-in-law Diane read the foreclosure notice out loud at Thanksgiving dinner, in front of my entire husband's family, with a smile on her face that made my blood run cold. 23 relatives stopped eating. My 7-year-old daughter started crying. What Diane didn't know was that my foreclosure lawyer had just discovered a document in the county records that would not only save my house, but expose the darkest secret the Montgomery family had buried for 11 years. My name is Melissa Thornton, and 6 months ago, I thought my biggest problem was choosing paint colors for my daughter's bedroom. My husband James and I had finally finished paying off what we believed was a family loan for our home, a modest 3-bedroom ranch in suburban Ohio that we poured every penny of our savings into renovating. We'd signed the last check in August. Handed it directly to James's older brother Victor at a family barbecue. Shook hands. Hugged. Victor had even made a toast about family helping family. That's why the foreclosure notice made no sense. There has to be a mistake, James said, his face pale as he read through the legal documents that had arrived by certified mail. We paid everything. Every single payment for 15 years. I have the receipts. But according to the paperwork, we didn't own our house. We never had. The property was held in a trust, the Montgomery Family Trust, and we were being evicted for failure to comply with residency terms. What residency terms? I grabbed the documents from James's shaking hands. We've lived here for 15 years. We've never missed a payment. We renovated the kitchen, the bathrooms, the entire basement. We put in a new roof last year. That's exactly the problem, sweetheart. I looked up to see my mother-in-law, Patricia Montgomery, standing in the doorway of our living room. I hadn't heard her car pull up. I hadn't heard the door open. She'd let herself in with a key I didn't know she had. Behind her stood Victor and Diane, both wearing expressions of barely concealed triumph. You made improvements, Patricia continued, settling herself onto my couch like she owned it, which, apparently, she believed she did. Substantial improvements. Without written permission from the trust. According to paragraph 47 of the residency agreement you signed, any unauthorized modifications constitute breach of contract. We never signed any residency agreement, James said. We signed a loan agreement. For a loan. That we paid back. In full. Patricia smiled, and it was the same smile I'd seen 1,000 times at family dinners, the one that made me feel like a stain on her perfect family portrait. Did you read what you signed, James? All 43 pages? James looked at me, then back at his mother. You told us it was standard paperwork. You said the family lawyer reviewed everything. You said we didn't need our own attorney because it was just family helping family. And I believed that, Patricia said smoothly. At the time. But circumstances change. Your father's death changed many things about how this family operates. Dad's been dead for 11 years, James said, his voice breaking. Why now? Why are you doing this now? Victor stepped forward, adjusting his silk tie with the casual arrogance of someone who never questioned his place in the world. Because now is when we need the property, little brother. The trust is restructuring. We're liquidating certain assets. Your house happens to be worth 3 times what it was when you moved in, thanks largely to the neighborhood improving and partially to the improvements you made without authorization, improvements we made to our own home. Improvements you made to trust property, Victor corrected. Big difference. Legally speaking. Diane laughed, the same high-pitched giggle she'd used since high school to mask cruelty as playfulness. Oh, don't look so devastated, Melissa. It's not personal. It's just business. Surely even you understand that. I understood more than she knew. I understood that I was watching a family cannibalize one of their own. I understood that my husband, the kindest man I'd ever known, was being erased by the people who should have protected him. And I understood that I would burn their entire empire to the ground before I let them take our home. The thing about the Montgomery family is that they always operated on a simple principle, blood over everything. Patricia and her late husband, Richard, had built a small real estate empire over 40 years, nothing flashy, just steady accumulation. A strip mall here, an apartment complex there, a handful of rental properties scattered across 3 counties. By the time Richard died of a heart attack 11 years ago, the Montgomery portfolio was worth roughly $12 million. Richard had 4 children, Victor, the eldest and clear favorite, twins Diane and Derek, and James, the youngest by 7 years. That accident, they called him. The afterthought. From the moment I married James 14 years ago, Patricia made it clear where we stood in the family hierarchy. Victor got the corner office at Montgomery Properties. Derek got a 6-figure salary to manage the apartment complexes. Diane married a surgeon and received a $2 million wedding gift. James got a job in the warehouse, organizing filing cabinets. When we wanted to buy our first home, Patricia offered what she called a family opportunity. The Montgomery Trust owned a modest ranch house in a decent school district. Instead of selling it to strangers, she'd let James and me purchase it through an internal family arrangement. No banks, no interest, no closing costs, she'd said, making it sound like a gift. Just family helping family. We'd been so grateful. So naive. The lawyer I hired was named Douglas Winters. He was 63 years old, had been practicing real estate law for 4 decades, and looked like someone's disappointed grandfather. His office smelled like old coffee and older books, and his desk was buried under towers of manila folders that seemed to defy gravity. "This is unusual," he said after spending 2 hours reviewing our documents. "Very unusual." "Unusual how?" "Well, Mrs. Thornton, in 40 years of practice, I've seen a lot of creative arrangements designed to avoid taxes, skirt regulations, or keep assets out of probate. But this?" He tapped a yellowed piece of paper. "This appears to be specifically designed to defraud you." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "The document you signed 15 years ago wasn't a loan agreement. It was a lease-to-own contract with approximately 43 pages of conditions, exclusions, and termination clauses. Most of them are buried in legal language that would require a law degree to understand." "The loan payments you were making?" "Legally categorized as rent." "So we've been paying rent for 15 years? We don't own anything?" "According to this contract, that's correct. However," Douglas's eyes narrowed as he flipped through more pages. "However, I noticed something interesting when I pulled the trust documents from the county recorder's office." He slid a photocopy across the desk. "It was a deed, the original deed to our property, dated 32 years ago. Your property was originally purchased by Richard Montgomery in 1993. At that time, it was held in his personal name, not in any trust. The Montgomery Family Trust wasn't created until 2007. So, Mrs. Thornton, when property is transferred into a trust, it requires proper documentation. Signatures. Notarization. Filing with the county. I've been doing this for 40 years, and I always check the chain of title." He paused. "The transfer documents for your property don't exist." "What does that mean?" Douglas leaned back in his chair. "It means either someone made a very significant clerical error, or your property was never legally transferred into the Montgomery Family Trust at all." What Douglas discovered next changed everything. When Richard Montgomery died 11 years ago, his estate went through probate. Patricia, as the surviving spouse, received the bulk of the assets. The 4 children received specific bequests according to Richard's will. But there was a problem. Richard Montgomery's official will was filed with the probate court in January 2014, Douglas explained, spreading documents across his conference table. "It's a standard document, everything to the surviving spouse, specific gifts to children, fairly straightforward." "I remember," I said. "James inherited some stock certificates and a watch." "Yes. But here's where it gets interesting." Douglas pulled out another document, this one encased in a protective plastic sleeve. "Last week, while researching the chain of title on your property, I requested all recorded documents associated with Richard Montgomery from the county archives. Land transfers, liens, easements, standard due diligence." He slid the plastic sleeve toward me. "I found this filed in a miscellaneous records box that apparently hadn't been opened since 2009. It's an amendment to Richard Montgomery's will, dated 6 months before his death, specifically addressing the distribution of real property." My hands trembled as I read the document. The handwriting was shaky but clear. The signature was notarized and witnessed. And the contents made my heart stop. "Richard Montgomery amended his will to leave your property directly to James," Douglas said quietly. "Not to the trust. Not to Patricia. Directly to his youngest son. Free and clear." I didn't tell James what I'd found. Not yet. Instead, I asked Douglas to dig deeper. If there was one hidden document, there might be more. And I needed to understand exactly what we were dealing with before I confronted my husband's family. Over the next 2 weeks, Douglas and his paralegal reconstructed the paper trail that the Montgomerys had tried so hard to bury. Richard Montgomery had known he was dying. His heart condition had been diagnosed 18 months before his death, and his doctors had given him less than 2 years. In those final months, he'd begun making changes, quiet changes that his wife apparently knew nothing about. The amendment to his will was just the beginning. Richard had been keeping a second set of books, Douglas explained during our 3rd meeting. Personal accounts separate from the family business. Conservative investments, modest withdrawals, nothing that would raise red flags. But over the course of 20 years, he accumulated a substantial sum. How substantial? Just over $3 million. I stared at him. $3 million? Where is it? That's the interesting part. Douglas pulled out yet another document. He established an education trust for his grandchildren. All of them. Victor's kids, Derek's kids, your daughter. Equal shares, professional trustee, completely separate from any family involvement. James never mentioned this. Because James was never told. According to the trust documents, the beneficiaries weren't supposed to be notified until the youngest grandchild turned 18. Your daughter won't reach that age for another 11 years. So Patricia doesn't know about this? Patricia absolutely knows about this. Her signature is on the original trust documents as a witness. Which means she's known about it for over a decade. Douglas paused. And which means she's been deliberately hiding it from all her children. I sat back in my chair, trying to process the magnitude of what I was hearing. $3 million. Hidden for over a decade. My daughter had a trust fund that would pay for her entire education, college, graduate school, whatever she wanted, and we'd been scraping together savings accounts and researching financial aid options. There's more, Douglas said, pulling out yet another folder. In the course of my investigation, I requested Richard's medical records from his final year. His cardiologist kept detailed notes, including documentation of every visitor during his hospital stays. Why does that matter? Because 2 weeks before Richard signed the amendment to his will, Patricia visited him alone for 4 hours. The nursing staff noted that she seemed agitated when she left. 3 days later, Richard asked his attorney to visit the hospital. That attorney, not the family lawyer, a different one entirely, supervised the signing of the amendment and the creation of the education trust. He was hiding it from her, I realized. Richard knew Patricia wouldn't honor his wishes. It appears that way. He specifically chose an attorney with no connection to the family, had everything filed with the county rather than stored with the estate documents, and told no one about the changes except the witnesses who signed. Douglas removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Mrs. Thornton, I've handled hundreds of estate cases. I've seen families fight over silverware and photographs. But I've never seen someone take such elaborate precautions to protect their own children from their spouse. What does that tell you? It tells me Richard Montgomery knew exactly what kind of woman he was married to. And it tells me he spent his final months trying to ensure she couldn't hurt his children after he was gone. The family meeting was scheduled for the first Sunday in December, at Patricia's house. The whole clan would be there, Victor and his wife and their 3 teenagers, Derek and his wife and their twins, Diane and her surgeon husband. And us, the family embarrassments, who were supposed to show up and meekly accept our eviction. Patricia had made it clear, sign over any claim to the property, agree never to discuss family finances publicly, and she would generously give us 90 days to relocate instead of 14. Family helps family, she'd said on the phone, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I'm willing to be reasonable, Melissa. But I need you to be reasonable too. I told her we'd be there. Then I called Douglas. Are you sure about this? He asked. Once you present these documents, there's no going back. Family relationships, holidays, birthdays, everything changes. Douglas, they tried to steal my home. They tried to put my children on the street. They've been lying to my husband his entire life. I took a breath. Some relationships deserve to change. Patricia's house was a 6,000 square foot colonial on 3 acres of manicured lawn. She decorated for Christmas with her usual precision, tasteful white lights, professional wreaths, a 12-foot Fraser fir in the foyer that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. The family was assembled in the formal living room when James and I arrived. 23 people, representing 4 generations of Montgomery prosperity, all watching as we walked through the door. Diane spoke first. So nice of you to finally join us. I hope you brought the paperwork Mother requested. I brought paperwork, I said. But not the paperwork your mother requested. Patricia's smile flickered. Melissa, dear, let's not make this more difficult then. Difficult? I pulled Douglas's file from my bag. Let's talk about difficult. Let's talk about what you've done to your own son for the past 15 years. I don't know what you think you found, but I found Richard's amendment to his will. I placed the document on the coffee table where everyone could see it. The one that leaves our house directly to James. The one that was filed with the county 6 months before Richard died. The one you somehow forgot to mention during probate. The room went silent. Victor recovered first. That document is obviously a forgery. Mother, don't let her, it's notarized by a registered notary public, I continued. Witnessed by 2 individuals who are still alive and very willing to testify. And filed with the county recorder's office, where it has been sitting in a miscellaneous records box for 11 years because someone, I looked directly at Patricia, apparently convinced the probate attorney it was misfiled and irrelevant. Patricia's face had gone pale. This is ridiculous. Richard would never what? Leave something to his youngest son? The son you've treated like an afterthought his entire life. I pulled out the next document. Here's the education trust he established. $3 million for his grandchildren. All of them. Equal shares. Your signature is right there, Patricia. You witnessed it. You've known about it for over a decade. Derek's wife spoke up. 3 million? For the kids? Why didn't anyone tell us? Because Patricia wanted to control everything, I said. The trust names a professional trustee, someone outside the family. Someone she couldn't manipulate. So she buried it. Hid it from all of you. Mother? Victor's voice had lost its confidence. Is this true? Patricia stood, her composure cracking. You don't understand. Richard made those changes when he was ill. He wasn't thinking clearly. He was being sentimental about James because he felt guilty about. She stopped. Guilty about what? James spoke for the first time since we'd arrived. What did Dad feel guilty about, Mom? The silence stretched. Tell him, I said. Or I will. Patricia's hand trembled as she reached for the armrest of her chair. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked old. Not elegant. Not composed. Just old, and tired, and caught. Your father and I had disagreements, she finally said. About how to raise you children. About what was fair and what was practical. He was too soft, especially with you, James. He indulged your hobbies, your interests in working with your hands rather than your mind. He said you reminded him of his father. Grandpa Joseph? James's voice was barely a whisper. The carpenter? Richard romanticized that man, Patricia spat, and some of her venom returned. His father died poor, James. He built houses for other people and never owned one himself. He worked until his body gave out and left nothing to his family but debts and sawdust. I refused to let that happen to my children. I pushed all of you toward success, toward security, toward the kind of life Joseph Montgomery could never provide. You pushed Victor and Derek and Diane, James said. You just pushed me away. Because you wouldn't listen. You were stubborn, just like Richard, just like his worthless father. You wanted to build things instead of own things. You wanted to create instead of acquire. Patricia's voice broke. And Richard encouraged you. Every time I tried to guide you toward the family business, he'd undermine me. Take you fishing. Teach you woodworking in the garage. Fill your head with romantic nonsense about working with your hands. He loved me, James said quietly. That's what you're describing. He loved me. He loved his idea of you. And when he got sick, when he knew he was dying, he decided to protect that idea at the expense of everything I'd built. Patricia looked at the documents spread across her coffee table. He knew I'd never let you squander your potential on that little house, playing carpenter like his father. So he hid it from me. Made arrangements behind my back. Tried to tie my hands from beyond the grave. But you found out, I said. After he died, you found out about the amendment. The attorney contacted me, Patricia admitted. He said Richard had left instructions for certain documents to be filed separately from the main estate. I convinced him it was a misunderstanding. That Richard hadn't been thinking clearly at the end. That the documents should be set aside until the family could review them properly. Set aside, Douglas repeated. Meaning buried. Hidden. Suppressed. Meaning protected, Patricia snapped. That money, that property, it belongs to the family. Not to individual children who might waste it. Not to outsiders who married in. She looked at me with undisguised contempt. I was protecting the Montgomery legacy. You were controlling it, I said. There's a difference. The aftermath took months to sort through. Douglas filed a formal challenge to Richard's probate, presenting the amended will and supporting documentation. Victor hired his own attorneys, who initially threatened countersuits, but eventually advised settlement when they reviewed the evidence. The foreclosure action was dropped immediately. The house was officially transferred into James's name, where Richard had always intended it to be. The education trust was unfrozen and properly documented. All the grandchildren, including Victor's, Derek's, and Diane's, would receive their shares when the youngest turned 18. Patricia was not charged with criminal fraud. Douglas advised against it, partly for practical reasons and partly because James asked him not to pursue it. She's still my mother, he'd said. I don't want her in prison. I just want her to stop lying. The family, predictably, fractured. Victor hasn't spoken to us since. Derek reached out once, a stilted email apologizing for not seeing what was happening. Diane sent a legal notice demanding that we never contact her family again, which we were happy to comply with. Patricia calls sometimes. Late at night, after she's had too much wine. She never apologizes. I'm not sure she's capable of it, but she asks about our daughter, and James talks to her for exactly 5 minutes before saying goodnight. Last month, we finished renovating the basement. Put in a playroom for my daughter, a home office for James, and a small gym in the corner where I do yoga before work. The contractor we hired whistled when he saw the original work we'd done. Whoever did this knew what they were doing, he said, running his hand along the foundation we'd reinforced ourselves. This house is solid. Built to last. I watched my husband smile, really smile, the way he used to before 15 years of his family's manipulation wore him down, and I thought about Richard Montgomery. I never met my father-in-law. He died 3 years before I became a Thornton. But I've seen pictures, read his handwriting, studied the careful provisions he made for a son he knew wouldn't be protected. Richard understood something that Patricia never did: family isn't about blood or money or keeping up appearances. Family is about showing up. Making sure the people you love have solid ground beneath their feet. Building something that lasts. The house is in James's name now. The mortgage is paid. The deed sits in our safe deposit box, next to the amended will that saved us. But more valuable than any document is what we finally have after 15 years, the truth. And the knowledge that sometimes, the dead protect us better than the living ever could. If you've ever experienced family betrayal or legal manipulation, share your story in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe for more real stories about justice, family, and finding the truth.